Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Bollinger, Managing Director of York County Community Foundation's Embracing Aging Initiative. We're passionate about creating a York County that is equitable and respectful of all ages. Over 100 years ago, a woman named Anna Gardner gifted her estate so that older residents in York County could have the best quality of life. And we are honored to carry on her legacy. Her work supports embracing aging. Too often negative thinking about aging gets in the way of our quality of life as we age. And that's why Embracing Aging started to host this series of sessions where we're interviewing people who are sharing stories and insights, tips and resources to help us improve how we think about our own aging and to help us learn about different ways that we can connect in and engage in the community so that we can have a better quality experience as we age. If you want to learn more about our work, please visit embracingaging.org. And if you are on Facebook, please follow us at YCCF Embracing Aging. Our session today is being recorded and it will be available in about 2 weeks online. Our format is the first 20 minutes or so. I will be asking our guests questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask questions and make comments. Along the way, if you'd like to make a comment before we open it up, please go ahead and use the chat box. So joining me today is Gerrie Reddinger from Penn Cares organization, and we are very excited to have her here. Penn Cares received a grant from Embracing Aging a while ago for a program, a series of 6, sessions to help older adults who are now raising grandchildren learn about the tips and the resources to help them in their work. And we wanted to highlight this because we know that there's a growing number of older adults who are fulfilling this role. And we know that Penn Cares offers lots of great tips and resources to help. So Gerrie, welcome. We're glad to have you here today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's go ahead and start with a question that some people might be thinking, because, grandparents have to raise their own children. So what's different about raising grandchildren and why this series?
Sure. So one of the biggest differences is the generational gap. Back when you think about your own childhood and think about your relationship with your grandparents, and now think about maybe your relationship with your child. If you're not a parent, your niece, your nephew, it's a digital age. And it wasn't a digital age even when I was younger, but let alone when our grandparents were around. So they're adapting not only to being thrust into the changing role from a grandparent to now a full-time caregiver, but also adapting to, what is this thing called InstaChat? Graham, that's Snapchat. What's this Instagram? So you're having to learn this whole other dialogue. I mean, even with myself, with my son, I'm like, I got to stay a step ahead so I sound like I know what I'm doing. But analogy that I like to use is, so when you're a grandparent, you've raised your kids, they're on their own, and it's like you're going on vacation. And you plan this wonderful vacation and you get to the rental counter. And the rental car man says, guess what? You know that nice car you planned? It's stick shift, and that's all we have. So what are your choices? You can say goodbye to your vacation because I haven't done stick shift in 20 years. What do I know? Or you can improvise, adapt, and overcome. And I think when grandparents are put in that situation, oftentimes, what are your choices? If you are thrust into being suddenly asked to care for your grandchildren, do you say no? Can you say no? And what happens if you say no? So even though you had everything planned, this wonderful vacation, now you need to stop and adapt it and go, all right, I'm going to learn how to drive stick again. And the car you picked out had navigation, it had ways you can plug it in and tell you where to go. Well, this one doesn't, because there's no roadmap that comes with how to be a grandparent raising your grandchild. I mean, if there is, I have not found it, because every case is different and every situation is going to need to be adapted, because it could be a temporary guardianship. It could be hey, I just woke up and there are these kiddos on my front doorstep. Or you could be the last step to prevent your grandchildren from going into the system. So there's a whole bunch of different reasons, and each reason is going to have a different drive behind it to help guide you where you're going to go.
Thank you, Gerrie. I got to tell you, I really love that car analogy because I think that it just helps really explain what this is all about and the need to kind of revisit and get some more tips in raising your grandchildren as an older person. One of the things that when I think about grandparents stepping into this role, I think that sometimes it might be a result of a crisis that happens in the family, whether it's a death or illness or something that has already put additional stress on a person or just a really difficult time. So if any of our viewers are finding themselves in this situation or know of somebody who's recently transitioned in this situation, what are the top things that they need to do? Like what do you think would be the way that they even start to go about taking on this new role?
Sure. And the first thing to do is kind of take a breath and center and clear your mind. And I say that for any major life decision that you have. You can't be reactionary. You need to pause and reflect. So whether that's deciding to get married, buy a house, you don't do these things on the spur of the moment. However, you don't really have time to plan when you suddenly become the guardian of your grandchildren. So you do need to think about what your next steps are, but you don't need to be instant right away. Like you have a little bit of time to gather yourself. And the first question I think you need to ask yourself is how long will I be in this situation? For example, is my child going to basic training and then they're going to the Army, so afterwards we can relocate? Or is my child going away for a work job program to better themselves and it's a year? So if you think about the mind frame, if you know how long it is, you can prepare yourself. But in some cases, you might not know. If your child's incarcerated, there could be an indeterminate length of time. If your child unfortunately is passed or is incapable of being their parent any longer, then you are now that person's caregiver. So I would advise finding a family lawyer and deciding whether or not you need to seek official custody and guardianship, because what that's going to do for you as the grandparent is it's going to give you rights. It's going to give you a legal leg to stand on. Some, for example, in early intervention or child care, if you have a child who needs to receive services, grandma and grandpa can't sign off unless mom, dad gives authorization. Now, some people, there's a little more wiggle room and it would be okay. But however, you want to make sure you're covered so that nobody can come back and say, well, who signed off on this? Grandma. Well, what's grandma's right? She doesn't, she's just grandma. And I would also transition from calling yourself just grandma or just grandpa, because you take the just out. I am grandma. I am grandpa. I'm filling in. And you need to take ownership of that role. The second one would be, there are lots of different programs out there to guide you. So if you have guardianship and you have educational and educational rights, there's also different things you can do. You can look to see if you qualify for TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, because kids are expensive. 1 kid, 2 kids, and most seniors, some seniors are living on a fixed income. So this will help you stretch your budget and also see if you can qualify for different things like food stamps. There's a really good website. It's guidestar.org. And that's the National Committee of Grandparents for Children's Rights. And that website lists a bunch of different information and support and kind of guides grandparents in that situation. And so you also can look at and talk to see whether or not when you file your taxes, if you qualify for earned income. So it's not all about the money, but it's going to help. It's going to help you take that edge off. If you can get a little support that way, it's one less thing you need to worry about. And when you go into a school system, when you go into a childcare setting, be authoritative, let them know who you are and this is your role. Because sometimes, and I know we're guilty of it from an education standpoint, we don't always assume, we don't know from our point, is grandma dropping off because mom's busy? Is grandpa dropping off because dad is working late? Or is this a permanent situation? And it helps the educators understand so that when we have things, we don't blanket it. We have a special person's day so that everyone's incorporated. So making sure that you advocate and announce who you are, because you're important and people need to know that.
Gerrie, I'm I'm sorry. Can I ask a follow-up question to some
Sure.
of these resources?
Yeah.
The temporary assistance for needy family, is that something that they can just type into their browser and it pops up, or is there?
Sure. If you Google TANF, TANF, it'll walk you through, and there's an application. So you need to apply for it. And I call it a plug and chug form. So you'll need some basic information, like your income, and it asks a series of questions, but that's a really good resource.
And the other one was guide, GUIDE star
Star.
.org.
Correct.
Okay. And one of the another follow-up question is, there might be families who have been talking about like what would happen if something were to happen to me as a parent. Who would I want to have raise my child? But they haven't hit that point. Is there any advice that Penn Care has for families being more proactive, so that once, if something were to happen, they already have some things identified? Or
Sure. And I would advise this to any parent, regardless of your situation or age, is to go ahead and make that last will and testament. Because if something happens, you don't want it to leave it to, well, what if? You don't want to put that burden of an already stressful situation. You've lost your child, you've lost your daughter, you've lost your son. Now, okay, well, who's left? You don't want to eeny, meeny, miny, moe this child's future. So when I was pregnant with my son, that was one of the first things that my mom, who works for lawyers, said, hey, hun, I advise doing this. And so we did. And then you need to also ask that person, hey, if something were to happen to me, are you comfortable with this? This might include, and then willing to get consent. And so once you have it written, you do need to have it notarized, because for years we had ours written and my mom said, hun, this is great, but unless it's notarized, it doesn't really mean anything. So making sure you follow through with that step of having it notarized. And that at least lets the courts know this is what these people's wishes were. And that makes it a little easier. That's if you can plan ahead. But I would also encourage to have open dialogue with your family. And sometimes as a parent of the child who might need the help, hey, what are you going to do? Like, you're going down this road, or what is your plan? Like, I need to know. And so you need to not also advocate for yourself, but you need to advocate for your child and kind of push them. And we know as parents, we got to push them sometimes in that direction to make that decision, especially if it involves me. So, hey, if you're thinking about this, I need to prepare, because I was going to go and retire X, Y, and Z. But if I know I need to stay, then I need to adjust my plans, or am I willing to adjust my plans?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gerrie. So let's talk a little bit. I'm sure there's a range of emotions that are surrounded by grandparents raising grandchildren. And what tips do you have for older adults in their self-care as they navigate this new role?
So self-care is so important, and it's not selfish. So self-care is the best thing and the easiest thing you can do for yourself, but it's also the hardest, because oftentimes you put yourself on the back burner, whether it's as a parent, whether it's at your job, at your demand. Sometimes people's nurturing personalities naturally align themselves to, I'm going to hold myself last, because you do think it's selfish, but it's not. So the best tips that I can say is, you want to assemble your team, you want to assemble your tribe, and those are going to be people that you can call on to rely on. So we went back to the analogy with a navigation. So you want to, I equate this to, hey, hey, Stacy, do you remember that trip we had when we drove stick shift back in 2000? Yeah, refresh me. How does that go? You want to call back on your friends. I know I just did this last week when I was thrust into the sudden life of newborns for 2 weeks. I was texting my one friend, what did we do when this happened? So even though it was a temporary situation, you surround yourself with who you know, and those are people that you can rely on. So don't be afraid to ask for help. They're your lifelong friends for a reason. Be your own caregiver, whether that means in the morning you're sitting outside with your coffee, listening to the birds for 5 minutes by yourself. That's me time. Whether it means you're watching, an episode on Netflix after the kids have gone to bed, fingers crossed they sleep through the night, and you're relaxing. or it's finding just a little bit of time, whether it's 5 minutes, to just be you and block out the world and being mindful in that 5 minutes. It's really easy to focus on what you don't have and what's not going right, but to have an attitude of gratitude during those 5 minutes. You know, I am alive. I like the way the birds sound. I have a steady job. I have a husband or a wife or a partner that loves me. So being just appreciative of what you do have in the moment and being mindful. Finding an outlet. It is tough. Raising kids at whatever age is tough, coupled with the different strains that you're in as a grandparent. So maybe that outlet is, you know, you go and you power walk around the neighborhood, or you find an online support group as well as your outlet for someone to talk to who is in that same situation. But also setting boundaries. So if you have a situation where the parents may be in or out, you need to establish a boundary. You asked me to watch them until this time. This is when I'm done. And holding and enforcing those boundaries, as hard as it is to tell your grown-up child, no, I can't, you told me this. You have to do it for your own well-being. And in the end, it will be okay. And then finding a way to connect with that child's parent, maybe in a different way. So maybe the child, this is a situation where you're, like a case that I had years and years ago, the mother was still around, but realized she was incapable, but was kind of in the background, and they would meet every once in a while. So that mom had to find a different way to connect to her daughter, and almost like, because of, she couldn't hold it against her, like, hey, I'm raising your kid. How do I connect with you on a friend level? How do I change my relationship so that there's no hostility? So finding different ways to connect and letting go will help you with that relationship. And also, don't be afraid to call in backup. That kind of goes along the lines with assembling your own team. Calling in for help, if, taking turns, taking shifts. If you need to go into the grocery store by yourself is not a luxury, but it's a way to, call in for backup or go ahead and let those dishes pile up and go and read the story with the grandkid. That's okay too. So the backup it's important.
Those are great tips for self-care, Gerrie. Thank you so much. So tell us more about the series that Penn Cares is offering, all the different topics that are being covered. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the trainings also in our chat box for everybody.
Sure. So it's we have a couple different series. There's 6 in this one. So we first talked about effective communication. And so that's how to use your voice, how to realize that you do have one. And so their next one coming up in May is advocacy. So now you have your voice. Okay, well, what am I going to do with it? How do I advocate to get my needs met? And then there's one on self-care, which we've highlighted that's important. And there's another one on transitioning and education into the classroom and beyond. So how do you transition from what you have to what you have moving forward? And that's a series of web-based. And what's nice is you can cherry pick and you can take one training or two, or you can do them all. But that's what we do.
Wonderful, great. And before we open it up, I'm going to ask just one more question, Gerrie. Are there stereotypes about grandparents, grandchildren that you find that we need to overcome, we need to address?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? There was some background noise.
Sure. Are there stereotypes, assumptions about grandparents raising grandchildren that we can work to address and overcome and reframe as people who are joining today to learn more about this and helping other people?
Sure. I think that one of the stereotypes that you may encounter is that the grandparent perspective it is the same as I'm trying to phrase. So the grandparent perspective of, oh, they're just the doting, the loving, the no discipline. I think sometimes people tend to think, oh, they live with grandma, so you know how that goes. Or, oh, grandpa's too old to get down and play. So not making those assumptions based on age, based on, physical stature, based on body appearance. And I think, well, you shouldn't judge them that way anyway, but let alone with grandparents. And I think often oftentimes it's easy to just assume that because it's different, a grandparent isn't going to know how to do it. We kind of joked about not understanding the generational gap, but there are grandparents out there that are quick, and they do know, all the ins and outs, and they are, up with modern trends. So not to lump everybody together with that distant, and that age is just a number, and that everyone evolves and everyone adapts, and we all are constantly learning this together as well.
Thank you, Gerrie. And now I'd like to open it up to our guest today. We have a question that came in. Does Gerrie have statistics on how many grandparents are raising their grandchildren nationally or locally?
Ooh, that's a good, I should have pulled it. I don't have those.
Also, Gerrie, what is the trend, increase or decrease, and what are the top situations of this happening?
Sure. I don't have statistics, but it definitely there is an uptick. We know that with the opioid crisis that created a different situation. But also, if you think about with COVID now, grandparents are pulled and demanded to do a lot more than they had, simply based on the fact that our lives are completely upheaved. Think about things that are changed. Like, we're all working remotely, but now as we're phasing back in, maybe you're not remote, maybe you're not. And the grandparents really do. I know I've had my mom step up because I couldn't do X, Y, and Z because he's home or because he needed. And my son has some special needs, so he does need one-on-one. So I've had to call her and his backup. So I think that, COVID definitely adds to the situation. Prescription drug abuse and opioid incarceration, some of those rates are going up, but also mental health. And we know that the situation of mental health is affected greatly by the pandemic. And so some people aren't able to cope. Like, it's the stress and the factors themselves have led to some deterioration in mental health, which has enabled, has affected people's parenting or the ability to parent, or the I just can't even today. So if you can't take care of yourself, you definitely can't take care of your children. And I think that that's thrust some grandparents into that spotlight. And that might be one of those just temporary bases. But for sure that's definitely played a factor into it.
Thank you very much, Gerrie. Other thoughts, questions, comments?
Excuse me.
So can you tell me, in terms of the series that you're offering, is this the first time that I know it was a grant through Embracing Aging, but is this the first time? And is it something that you think you'll be continuing? And how might people learn about when you will repeat it, if you will repeat it?
Sure. So this is the first time that we're offering it. We also received a different grant, so we were all able to offer it in a different area as well. And so based on that, we will offer it again if there's enough feedback and the community says, hey, this was really good, I really need it. And I did just receive an email today from another agency who was very interested, from a group of grandparents that they felt needed support. And as always, if you can always go onto our website, penncares.org/upcoming trainings, and you can request it. So even if it's not something that's offered, if you said, hey, I really wanted to go, but things just didn't align up, you can contact us and we'll go ahead and see if we can put it together. We'll do it, because there is that need. And sometimes maybe you're not brave enough to ask for that help right away, because that does take courage to say, hey, I need some help. So maybe you're not ready now, but maybe you'll be ready later.
Great, thank you. And is there a support group at all for grandparents in York County that you can share? Was that something, Maggie, you were just going to ask, or did you just ask it? She just typed it in.
Well, I've been asked that several times, and so my best suggestion was officially, I haven't found broadcasting, but I do think that Facebook groups is a really good way. So searching like grandparent support groups on Facebook, it's a good way to connect, or even starting your own. But just in general, sometimes it's hard to find that support group. So like I did, I couldn't find one for a parent with ADHD child, so I made one myself. So that would be my also advocate. Just put yourself out there. Hey, any other grandparents want to connect? This is where I'm at. And you might be surprised at what comes around, because there are other people in your shoes, and there are other people that are maybe not as brave as you to put out that first step.
Thank you.
I wonder how many marriages are destroyed because of it.
Oh, I'm sure. You know, it always comes back down, especially if the one parent, if it's doesn't, is like, no, I've done raised my kids. They made their bed, they need to lie in it. And the other parent is, but this is my grandchild, this is my blood, I have to do it. Oh, I'm sure. And how could it not put a strain on that marriage? So I think that goes back to where you're finding support with your spouse and with your support group, because if you don't have support in your marriage itself, it's going to be really challenging to move forward because of all the added strain. So that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I think it speaks to the importance of open communication, constantly be talking about things, thinking things through, doing the what if scenarios, and really be proactively planning for, what would we do if we were put in this situation, instead of waiting until, and I don't even like the way I phrased that. I don't like being put in this situation. I don't like how that is. But, if a person finds themselves in a situation where they might take on this role, if they think about it ahead of time and what it would mean, and even the importance of asking their grown children, what are like the values that are most important to you for me to continue to instill in raising your child, in the, just questions like that really are getting some thoughts out there. So we certainly, Gerrie, thank you so much for your sharing your insights, your expertise, and your energy and passion for this topic, and also for the whole organization of Penn Cares and all the services that you provide out into our community. To learn more about Penn Cares, you can find them at penncares.org. And then, as Gerrie said, /upcoming trainings is where you can find information about all of their trainings that they offer. We really appreciate, again, Gerrie, you being with us, and for all of you for joining us today about this important topic. Our next session is Tuesday, May 11th. So it's right around the corner. It's next week at 2:00. And this one is with Selena Generett. And she is someone who decided that after a 25-year career in crunching numbers, she was going to launch an event planning business. And she's going to talk to us about how she required the skill set to become an entrepreneur and what it means to her, and share a little bit about her event planning business. So again, everybody, thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us, and I wish everybody an Embracing Aging type day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.